Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. We are so excited for the event tonight. Tonight, we're going to Scotland. It's Highlands to Islands, single malt Scotch seminar. We are very excited to have two great brands on with us tonight. So we have Lauren from Ardbeg joining us, and we have Dan from Glenmorangie, and we have a chock full night for you. We're going to be tasting 6 products, making a cocktail, giving away 15 prize packs to people who pre-registered for tonight's event. So if you're watching on Facebook, please pre-register for future events because these brands are giving us some amazing swag. So we are thrilled about tonight's presentation. I've never been to real Scotland, but I'm thrilled to be visiting virtually tonight. We're going all up and down the coast. Also on the line tonight, we have our own spirits marketing specialist, Mark Roy. So if you have any questions, go ahead, leave some comments now. We're going to be monitoring comments and questions throughout the stream tonight. But, like I said, we've got a packed night, 6 products. I'm going to turn things over to Lauren and Dan. Let's get tasting.
Sounds good. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Mark, for hosting us for this event. We are thrilled to be a part of it. One of the reasons that I really enjoy being a part of a company that represents both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg is just how different they are from each other. Even though they're part of the same subcategory of Scotch whiskies, they're both single malt Scotch whiskies. But the 6 whiskies that we'll have tonight will be strong demonstrators of the fact that these whiskeys are quite a lot different from each other stylistically, and Lauren and I will talk through how they get to be that way. Lauren is our ambassador on the East Coast for both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, a lovely and talented gal. She will talk us through the Ardbegs. I'll talk us through the Glenmorangies, and then at the end we'll make a penicillin cocktail that incorporates both Glenmorangie Original and Ardbeg 10. So the way that we'll do this is we'll do one Glenmorangie, then an Ardbeg, then a Glenmorangie, then an Ardbeg, and then finally a Glenmorangie and then an Ardbeg, followed by the cocktail. Beginning with Glenmorangie Original and Ardbeg 10. The reason that we put these two first in this discussion is that they're both the flagship expressions from each distillery. For Glenmorangie, if you happen to look us up if you're bored one night, you look us up in the Malt Whiskey Yearbook, and you look under distillery style, what they're describing is our flagship expression, Glenmorangie Original, the historic 10-year-old expression that comes from Glenmorangie. All ex-bourbon oak matured, light, fruity, floral, citrusy, and nothing about it that's smoky. On the other hand, when you look at what happens at Ardbeg, their flagship expression, Ardbeg 10, is nearly the opposite of all those things for some really compelling reasons. So before we get to that first Glenmorangie Original, we'll just kind of have Lauren give us a little bit of perspective in terms of where Ardbeg is and what you think makes it especially unique as a distillery.
Thank you, Dan. So Ardbeg has had probably one of the more tumultuous histories when it comes to a whiskey distillery. It is 100% a distillery that people fought for. We were actually officially started in 1815, but if you read any of the history, they were producing whiskey way before then. We just decided to get legal in 1815. So we leave the Highlands to go over to Islay, and if anybody has had the opportunity and pleasure to go to Islay, it's an absolutely beautiful place to get to. It just can be a little difficult. You can take a puddle jumper and get over there. There's about 2 flights a day, or you can take the more scenic route and take a ferry to get there and see all of the islands, of the water, of kind of what leads you into this very tiny but historic, wonderfully packed island. We always joke in Islay, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, because there's a good chance in one day you're going to have all 4 seasons. Whether it's going to be hail, sunshine, rain. And I think that's one of the reasons they make one of the more beautiful, flavorful whiskeys out there. Of course, when you're talking with Islay, you are talking with more of a peated whiskey, that lovely smoke, that flavor, that salty salinity to it. Islay itself does have the most peat, content. And that's why you kind of have that sort of essence that's built into it. So when you get off of your plane or your ferry, you're going to go to the tail end of the island and you're going to find Ardbeg. My favorite thing about Ardbeg, and you'll see this when you taste the Ardbeg 10, it's so captures its area. It really is genuinely a sense of place. It's right on the ocean. So if you go and stand on that rocky cliff, you'll get some lovely sea salt spray that comes. We're still working off of just 2 stills. So a small place that produces a good amount of whiskey, but not too much. So it's always about the craft. That will change, but as of right now, that's where we are. And you're going to smell this almost kind of like sweet caramel that's coming out and that lovely, lovely peat. There is nothing that tastes like Ardbeg on that shore. And once you're there, even if you were not necessarily a fan of peated whiskey, it will become part of you. There's also a really great cafe and probably some of the most friendly people I've ever met in my life. It is a community. Everybody is all about making sure that every distillery is, surviving its family. And as I mentioned, Ardbeg had a very rocky history, very roller coaster history, incredibly popular up until about the 1890s. And then it kind of struggled in the early 1900s and eventually got traded and then shut its doors. Moet Hennessy went and purchased it from a rival distillery. And this is, again, where it comes down to the passion of the people. They sold it to them. We were able to procure some of the old barrels that we've had and started to make our own whiskey. What makes Ardbeg so beautiful is, again, that rich, round flavor to it. And when we talk about Glenmorangie, we're always talking about finishes. When we talk about Ardbeg, it's always about putting together the best barrels to make each dram unique. But we'll get there.
Excellent. Very cool. So in somewhat direct contrast, what you've got going on at Glenmorangie is a coastal North Highland distillery. Lauren had mentioned it's quite difficult. It's not difficult, it's time consuming to get to Islay. It's impressively time consuming to get from Islay to the coastal North Highlands where Glenmorangie is. It'll take you basically all day. They're not that far apart. You could squish all of Scotland into Nevada with quite a bit of room to spare, but it is quite a diverse landscape from the southern Hebrides where Islay is located to the Northern Highlands. You're going to cross seas, fairly stormy seas, rocky coasts, mountains, valleys, glens and dales all over the place. It's a beautiful country from top to bottom. Where we are in the coastal North Highlands is it is not the most densely packed distillery landscape in Scotland. That award goes to the Speyside subdistrict of the Highlands. Where we are in the coastal North Highlands, the closest neighbors that we have, to give you some perspective in terms of distilleries, Ball-Blair is just down the road from us. Dalmore is quite close. And then a little farther up the road, Clynelish, Brora, and eventually Old Pulteney before you sort of fall off into the water and swim like hell until you get to Orkney, where you would find Highland Park and Scapa. So with that, Glenmorangie being an unpeated whiskey with a very sort of citrus and floral forward style, we're dealing with a different type of water source. We're dealing with a different configuration of still. We're dealing with a different fermentation medium. And we're dealing with a different cask maturation program at Glenmorangie. So we're going to kick into Glenmorangie Original first. Looks a little like that, giraffe not included. Although we talk about giraffes a lot at Glenmorangie because if we happened to have a few just lying around, an adult male giraffe is about the same size, height as the stills at Glenmorangie. Contrasting that with Ardbeg, which are quite short, that's going to produce a difference in terms of the character of the new make. And that tends to manifest itself most clearly in Glenmorangie Original. So what I've got here, and just to give you a sense of the color of this thing, you've got a sort of a golden hue, sort of glows in the glass a little bit. For those of you who are not necessarily new to the category, but looking for some visual cues to try to discern what's in your glass, that's a good indicator that that's seen ex-bourbon oak maturation. If it had seen a different style of maturation, like port oak, you'd see a much different color. So here we're just looking at first and second fill ex-bourbon oak for a minimum of 10 years. Bottled at 43 ABV. The things that stand out for me with Glenmorangie Original are that it preserves this really lovely citrus and white flowers and lavender note that are produced in the fermentation phase and then accentuated in the distillation phase via these exceptionally tall stills. The more copper contact the distillate vapors have, the more delicate they become, and the more the fruit elements that came from the fermentation phase are exposed. Combine that with the idea that this only ever sees the inside of an ex-bourbon oak cask, and that cask hasn't been used more than twice. About 60% of this has spent 10 years in first fill ex-bourbon oak, and the other 40% in second fill ex-bourbon oak. 90+% of the casks in Scotland full of whiskey that are laying down and maturing currently had bourbon in them first, so we would call those ex-bourbon oak. In this case, that 60-40 blend gives you a lovely balance between wood extractive notes, and you can sort of call those up as being vanilla, toasted coconut, sea salt caramel, cake spices, a little clove, possibly a little bit of an astringency on the palate, and what the new make brings to the table, which is more of those floral characteristics and citrusy, fruit-forward characteristics. So as I'm drinking this, I could add some water if I wanted, a little bit of water there. It's not a required thing. Anytime that you add water to a whiskey, it's going to change that whiskey. If that change makes you happy, it was the right thing to do. If it doesn't make you as happy, maybe don't do it a second time. There really isn't a rule of thumb other than, did your smile go this way or this way? That's really your right or wrong answer. So as I'm sort of drinking through this, I wanted to just set this up. So from the Glenmorangie standpoint, to give you some context, the other two whiskeys that we'll have from Glenmorangie, the La Santa and the Quinta Rubon, use this as their basis. For the first 10 years of their lives, they sit in ex-bourbon oak just like original does. After that 10 years is up, they will be secondarily matured in a different cask type. Lauren will talk a bit about how Ardbeg handles that a bit differently than what Glenmorangie does. But what we have grown to have a claim of fame for is secondary maturation or wood finishing. The idea that you take a whiskey out of one type of cask and you put it into a second type of cask, specifically to draw the flavors and colors and aromas out of that secondary cask type. It gets a little bit geeky and complicated because that isn't really why we use ex-bourbon oak, but it's certainly why we would use fortified or dessert wine casks, because the liquids in those were a lower ABV. They would have left more residual solids behind in the wood, and we can therefore extract those into our whiskey, a bit like deglazing a pan. So as I sit and nurse this, I'm going to throw this back to Lauren, and she can begin talking about our next whiskey, which is Ardbeg 10. I'm going to throw that up in front of the camera here. And Lauren, take it away.
Love it. You just threw in deglazing a pan into all of that, which I think is really fantastic.
Thank you.
You said a couple things that I always love to kind of point on when we're talking about whiskeys and things like that. At the end of the day, it really is how you enjoy your whiskey. I always recommend for folks try it neat first, then maybe put a drop or a cube of ice in there. You can always go back, but just to kind of get, whatever the balance is, the alcohol, the viscosity that's actually on the whiskey. It kind of starts there. And if you like a lot of ice, no judgment. If you really just like a splash of water, or if you just like to have your whiskey neat, it's your preference. At the end of the day, it's your experience. And we all kind of come from different backgrounds to deal with food or culture or something like that. So whiskey is lovely and subjective. It's made in so many different places, which is why it's such a universal, wonderful spirit. So the difference between my glasses and Dan's glasses is I do have the fluted tulips, and I have to have a cap on it because, of course, right now my entire dining room is being filled with this incredibly aromatic, smoky caramel, richness that is going through. So even though I love the smell, when I'm going from dram to dram, I kind of want to pick up the subtle notes because it's kind of incredible with Ardbeg. So as Dan said, this is our flagship. This is our Ardbeg 10. We're incredibly proud of this. It's the most important whiskey that we make at Ardbeg. And that is not to say that we don't love any of the other whiskeys we make, but this is our core spirit to it. And one of the reasons we're so incredibly proud of it is because of the fact that, again, we took over this distillery and had to start producing whiskey. Very careful with it. We did not want to make a lot of people angry over in Islay. We wanted to stay true to what Ardbeg had always done. So for the Ardbeg 10, you're just looking at ex-bourbon cask. It's white American oak. We're more second fill than first fill because the difference between, say, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, we have a richer new make that's going in there. So you want to have that balance to the oak in it. If it had too much of that first fill, you'd almost get a little bit more of an aggressive side to it. And one of my favorite things about Ardbeg, it's not very linear. It is round and rich on your tongue. It doesn't go straight iodine or straight smoke to it. Instead, you kind of get that lovely saltiness, that caramel to it. you do get that wonderful peaty quality that you find over in Scotland. And again, when you look at our color for it, it is non-chill filtered and there is no caramel coloring. So that is all just lovely influence from the oak itself. I always kind of think it looks a little bit more like a flaxen green color. And again, just keep in mind, we are right on the ocean. So that, weather, that climate is adding a lot into our whiskey itself. We are still, again, just working off of the 2 stills, but if you happen to get a chance to go over into Ardbeg, you're going to look at the line arm. You're going to see this little blue apparator that's on there. And every time that we talk about our distillation and how many times we distill, there's never just a direct answer. It's never 2 times, 4 times. They always say it's 2-ish because they're always checking the Ardbeg itself to just make sure the balance it is. They might give a little bit more on that line arm to add a little bit more reflux into the whiskey itself. So Dan was talking about the stills over in Glenmorangie, those beautiful tall copper stills. Ours are a little bit shorter and a little bit more squatty because we want to have that spirit going around to kind of pull all of that contact to it. Again, to get that beautiful, rich flavor component to it. So on the Ardbeg, like I said, I always get that little bit of sweetness to it. I get that fresh salt spray. They say tarry rope on the bottle. I don't know what that is. It's more like, kind of saltwater taffy for me, that really rich, kind of like butterscotch to it. Just super clean. And again, even though we are consistently the peatiest whiskey in Scotland, it still to me is one of the most approachable to be coming out of Islay because of that 2-ish time that we're distilling on it. We don't do any floor maltings anymore. Everything actually happens over at Port Ellen. And yes, there are other whiskeys out there that do claim to be the peatiest as far as for the parts per million. I will tell you, we do have the highest roast on our barley over at Port Ellen. It's the highest recipe. So you're looking at about 50 to 60 ppms on this. So even though it's a little bit more of that rich style to it, it's incredibly balanced. And at the end of the day, that's what Ardbeg is. It's all about balance. Whether we're going to add in a sherry cask to it or anything else, it's going to just help to enhance the flavors that are already there.
You bring up an interesting point about the fruitiness of Ardbeg 10. Sometimes aggressively peated whiskeys, particularly Islay aggressively peated whiskeys, have this reputation for being meaty, sulfury, thick, and sort of creosote forward. And there are some whiskeys coming out of Islay that are exactly that. And that's what they're going for. And I love those whiskeys for that reason.
Yeah, Ardbeg is not going to be the peatiest. It's not the goal that it's going for. It's just the way that we produce. It's the way that our stills work. And it's the way that our roasted barley, adds that complexity to it, which is so fantastic. But, we want it to be something that's incredibly approachable to people. At the end of the day, I know that not everybody's going to love and go for, a peated whiskey and Islay whiskey. It may not be their style, but I think, especially if you add like a drop of water to it and just really open up that bouquet, you can get the different layers that are in there. It's not just going to be that straight iodine that you talked about, that incredible, hard campfire fire that you kind of get from some. Yes, a couple of ours, especially like the Ugadale, does have that sort of lovely, I won't say meaty texture to it, but it actually has, I always call it Memphis barbecue. There's that rich sweetness to it, almost like, kind of like caramelized bacon. Which now I'm gonna have to pour one after saying that, but it's tremendous. But it really kind of finds, a home and a heart with a lot of people. And we do tend to have the most wonderful committee members. And if you guys aren't part of the committee, you can sign up. You'll always know when our new releases are coming out. You'll learn a little bit more about the distillery itself, and you can see a little bit more about Shorty, who is the peatiest nose over on Islay. And speaking of peat, if anybody is not aware of what peat is, I'm sure you guys are, but obviously is, as Jackie says, who's over at Ardbeg, is the life of Islay itself. It is actually the composed fossilized vegetation that is there. We have these wonderful peat bogs that we cut into. And I think, Dan, how far did we get down when we were last there? Was it 15 meters?
Yeah, it was really, really down there. And if you think about each millimeter as being a year, you're going way back in time as you dig into a peat.
So what is there is no longer what Islay was anymore. They found saplings in this peat before that is not even like the type of tree that you can find. There aren't very many trees over in Islay. It's a very kind of open island to it. And they'll actually do these cuttings. They look like long square blocks to them, allow them to dry. And that's actually where you get that beautiful smoky texture that goes into the barley. And one of the reasons you see it so much over in Islay is that was kind of the fuel source for a while. They used it for everything. So of course, naturally it went into the whiskey, and thank goodness it did.
Yes, indeed. One of my favorite things about Ardbeg 10 is the citrus note. And as we've talked a little bit about what Glenmorangie stills, what Glenmorangie stills do in terms of encouraging copper contact and releasing those fruity or revealing the fruitiness in the whiskey. You had mentioned the purifier on the line arm of the spirit still at Ardbeg. It does a lot of that same stuff, encourages more reflux and brings out more fruitiness. And I believe it was Sean Huxler had mentioned in the comments a similarity to Lefroy. I would agree. There's a little bit in terms of Lefroy's cut points, and this is where things get really geeky. If you want your peated whiskey to be aggressively peaty, to remain aggressively peaty by the time it gets into the bottle, you're going to have to shift where your cut points are. Lefroy's are very late, so they're looking to accentuate that creosote nature that the peat brings to the table. Whereas at Ardbeg, peat is part of the equation, but the fruitiness is too. So even though sometimes Islay whiskeys get pigeonholed as, oh, you've had one, you've had them all, that is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. And if you look at just the sort of minutia in terms of the operations of the various distilleries, you'll kind of get a sense of what they're going for the individual distillery character. So, Lauren, that was awesome. Thank you. And I regrettably am putting down my Ardbeg 10 in favor of picking up a, let's see, did I do that right? Yes. So Glenmorangie Lasanta is coming up next here. My label is a little askew. Lasanta is coming up next in terms of the order of the tasting. This is what you can expect in terms of color. So there's going to be just a little bit more of a sort of mahogany character. It doesn't glow golden quite so much in the glass, and that's because of the exposure to ex-sherry oak. So sherry oak, when you hear that term, it isn't just like almost any other term in the Scotch whiskey vernacular. That doesn't mean one thing. It means quite a number of things. There are loads of different sherry types with loads of different sweetness levels and loads of different oxidative levels as well. I want to say, Sean, you had mentioned the Malaga Cask 12 year. The Malaga is not even sherry. It's from south of the Sherry Triangle, but it's the same general idea. That Malaga wine that we use the cask from for the Cask Select Malaga 12, that's some sweet stuff. What we're using here for Lasanta, it's a combination of casks. It depends on who you talk to, and this recipe gets adjusted from time to time because this evolves. If any of you are really, really hurting for entertainment and you want to check out my Instagram feed at GlenmoDan, I put a post up about a week ago that was a look at the evolution of the concept of Glenmorangie finished in Oloroso sherry cask from the original whiskey that we did like that, which was Glenmorangie 1963, until today's Lasanta. It's a process of evolution, just like with all of these things. By the time we get to Ano and Wee Beastie, if I shut up, then you're going to find a continuation of the evolution of the two concepts, the two distillery concepts. So back to Lasanta, 43 ABV. Its first 10 years are spent in first and second fill ex bourbon oak. Its final 2 years are spent in a combination of, so part of that will be routed into first fill Oloroso sherry cask, and part of that will be routed into first fill PX or Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. Oloroso, medium dry, chewy, somewhat oxidized, but typically you drink an Oloroso, it may surprise you how sweet it isn't. It's a lovely sherry for charcuterie, for nuts. It's a great food sherry. PX is too, but a different style. PX is a bit like it's bottersized. It's not exactly. PX is the grapes are sun baked like an Amarone would be. So the intensity of those grapes is concentrated because the water content is evaporated out via heat. So PX is going to be a very extracted flavor, very oxidized sherry notes. Oh, right on. Giraffe Conservation Package. Very nice. what we've got going on here is we're trying to extract those sherry notes. And if you're grabbing a glass of whiskey, you're wondering if it's seen any time in sherry wood, the color may start to give it away, but you can't absolutely rely on that. So dig into the nose of it. And if you start to run into things that remind you of not sherry, well, sure, sherry, but dates, nuts, figs, toffee, cake spices, cigar boxes, and maybe a freshly struck match or two, that's a pretty good indicator that that whiskey's seen some, most, or all of its maturation life in a cask that had previously held sherry. So in this case, that combination of Oloroso and PX brings that chewy, dried fruit, extractive, mouth-filling characteristic to Glenmorangie, but it only took 2 years to get there. Glenmorangie as a base spirit is actually relatively delicate. So an entire maturation in Oloroso sherry would be far too aggressive. That we would lose the essence of the Glenmorangie spirit in a sea, in a confusing forest of sherry notes. So those 2 years is just a sort of a kiss of what the power of sherry brings to a whiskey. And what's interesting about where we're headed here with the next Ardbeg, there are some sherry elements there and in Wee Beastie, but they're handled in a different way. And we're depending on which expression you're talking about, two different types of sherry application, and it's just handled a bit differently. So in this case, if I was to, before I add water, there's going to be that chewy, rich, center palate, datey characteristic. If I happen to add water to this, I can, for my face, I can only drink with my face. So I can only talk to you about what happens inside of my head. If I add water to this, I do tend to find that the wood extractive spicy characteristics and the Glenmo floral, the sort of the eucalyptusy, dried flower, and potpourri elements of what Glenmorangie brings to the table, those that get accentuated with the addition of water. And I tend to find that the chewy elements, the sherry elements, the more hallmark sherry elements tend to be a little bit subdued. So that's your call, obviously, as the drinker. So as I sit and nurse with glee this glass of Glenmorangie La Santa, what we'll do is we'll trade this off for the next Ardbeg, which is Ardbeg. And no, you may be tempted to pronounce it as Anoa, and as the owner of that bottle, you are at your leisure to pronounce it in any way you'd like. But the correct pronunciation, as Lauren will point out, is Ano. So with that, you know that. So there's the bottle. Lauren, take that away, and I'm gonna just kind of nurse this La Santa.
The rest of that, yeah. And again, what you were talking about, the really big differences between the two, we're going back to a finish, we're going back to the balance. So what they do so well, and by the way, we haven't mentioned Dr. Bill Lumsden, our tremendous, fantastic master distiller for both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, and Brendan McCarran, who's our head of maturing whiskey stocks. We also have Jillian as well, Jillian McDonald. These folks are hands in on everything. It's not like they just go and have a sip of a whiskey and let everything else happen. They're constantly over at the lab that we have over in Edinburgh and getting different samples, whether it's a new make, whether it's been sitting in oak for a while, and kind of getting that balance. It's always a blind tasting. And we had an opportunity to be over there and to see all these different vials and to go through what their day-to-day tasting is like. And it's incredibly intense, and where one can taste just really lovely to me, the next one tastes almost as good. They could point out about 15 different things that weren't quite working, whether it's moving the barrels themselves, whether it's leaving a little bit longer into a sherry port cask or something along those lines. Incredibly knowledgeable, gregarious folks that we get to work with. And one of my favorite things about Dr. Bill is the fact that he doesn't just follow one line. He's not just a whiskey lover. He is a lover of a lot of things, whether it's food or wine, which is why you will see some of these trippy barrels that we do at both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. We kind of really dip into like the nerdy side of wine over for Glenmorangie, whether it's going to be Tokai, Bordeaux, Burgundy, something along those lines, the newest release, Malaga. And then when it comes to Dr. Bill, he has a massive love and affection for sherry, which is why a lot of times when we go over to Ardbeg, you see that gentle kiss on whether it's the Ardbeg Ano or the Wee Beastie, Ugadale, something along those lines. For this year, we did throw some wine into our limited release. And by saying that, I don't mean we actually dumped a bottle of wine into the whiskey itself. We used some ex-Pinot barrels coming from New Zealand. which definitely had people take a moment and think about it, because this is not something we traditionally do. And Ardbeg is always kind of bucking the system on that, always standing out, which is why we named this one Ardbeg Black. We are kind of like the black sheep. We're not afraid to kind of go for it in certain ways and have fun, whether you're getting, these amazing Russian casks or sending our Ardbeg into space, which we did do that. We sent out some vials of new make. We also sent out some of the barrel particles itself. Why? Because we could, and we are the coolest nerds that you get to drink with sometimes, as Dan has already shown some of his cool geeky side, and I will throw in a couple fun ones as well. But we're going into Anno, and Anno, which is named after the Mull of O, which Dan has up there right now, is an interesting one. It was one of the ones that we actually made to be a little bit more approachable for different palates. Of course, that Ardbeg 10 is that classic, wonderful peaty whiskey. It's very classic for our Ardbegian fans. So this is actually one of the ones that Brendan McCarran, our head of maturing whiskey stock, really had a hand in. We're still looking at that wonderful ex-bourbon. You're also looking at some virgin French oak to it. And the difference between American and French oak, American oak, you kind of get a little bit more of that vanilla, that dill to it. French oak, you're going to get a bit more of those baking spices to it. So that lovely like nutmeg and that cedar to it, that sort of richness. And we actually created something that is called a gathering vat. And the sexiest way to put that, it's kind of a marriage of all these whiskeys together to sort of, again, balance them out. And when they sort of started with it, it was a little bit of that ex-bourbon, it was a little bit of that French, but there was something that was kind of missing to it. It almost had a little bit too much acidity to it. It was a little too crisp. So what they realized, that hidden ingredient, and again, going back to Dr. Bill, one of his big passions, is that Pedro Jimenez sherry cask that came in. And PX, it is a little bit more of a rarer sherry to it. It is definitely chased after. We are very lucky that we've done well with both, and by we, I'm stealing thunder from these guys, that we've done well with the sherries and kind of shown it. So we have these barrels that are a little bit rare and harder to come by, that we really kind of get to work out with, which is why when you see with La Santa, it was Oloroso for the longest time. About 5-6 years ago, we added in the PX. And for Anno, we have that PX, which is going to add that little bit of depth that goes into it. I always feel like PX to me kind of tastes like brown sugared dates. You're still getting that fruity component to it, but it's a little darker, deeper, and then the richness of that brown sugar that goes into it. Not too sweet, just really lovely. And again, going back to that fabulous Ardbeg Anno, so you're going to see it's almost kind of like a rich honey, like when you get that really lovely fresh honey, if you can find it at any of the farmers market. Going based between both the Ardbeg Anno and the 10, really that lovely flaxen green. You can even see it on the viscosity. You're kind of getting legs that are happening off of this whiskey, that sort of lovely clingingness that's going to show that's going to have a little bit more depth. Both of these fall into the 46 as far as for ABV. And on that nose, again, it's kind of got a little bit more of that nutty characteristic that Dan talked about that you find over in sherry. It's got a lot of that date. And then there's almost like that lovely sort of baking spice to it, whether it's kind of like, sort of like a baked apple tart or something that goes into it. Still a little bit of that saltiness to it. So a little bit of that like very fresh, clean, acidity. And again, super approachable. You get a tiny touch more heat in comparison to the 10. And I know that sounds weird, but because of the fact that we have that PX barrel that's in there, it gives just a little bit of a peppery kind of like kick to it. And that's not to say it's going to be like, a lot of alcohol and a lot of burn to it. It's just balancing everything out. So it's not too sweet. It's not, having too much of that vanilla to it. It just really rolls over the tongue for it. And that gathering vat that we were talking about, that gathering room that was built, that's actually the only one that is over on Isla, which is the same thing when we're talking about the line arm, the fact that we are, the only one has that ability to add that little bit more of reflux into our whiskey. Everything that they do is a wonderful technical way of doing it, but is also followed by a lot of passion with people constantly tasting it, checking the gauges and making sure everything else is coming out as balanced as possible. Really wonderful. This is a fun one to kind of make into a cocktail. I've thrown this into, you can either call it a Negroni or a Boulevardier, whichever line you want to go to on this. It makes a dynamite old fashioned, believe it or not. You just kind of have to balance out that sweetness a little bit. And my naughty habit for the winter, and it is getting cold over here in New York, is I like to throw it in hot chocolate. It's kind of a nice way to end an evening. Everything that we do, you know, when you talk about wine and champagne and things along those lines, it kind of goes into that pairing all the way with food. And I really genuinely believe with Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, they pair beautifully. That really comes down to the fact that these guys have a world outside of just whiskey. That's an all-encompassing world that they add into it. And again, want to kind of push those boundaries. So again, with all of our other whiskeys, non-chill filtered, no caramel coloring. So just beautiful, full, rich, full flavor. Said full twice, but I think that works with Ardbeg. Dan.
That's very full. That's some really full, extra full whiskey.
But yes, it is a very full, lovely whiskey.
You know, what's interesting to me about Ano, aside from literally everything about Ano, is that I'm not necessarily a dyed in the wool, add water to my whiskey guy. Sometimes it makes a whole lot of sense, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily have the effect that I'm looking for. Ano takes water really well. There's a honeyed note that comes forward, sort of honey and baked apple note that comes forward there that I really love. Obviously, like the PX is doing its thing.
It's not, again.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Yeah.
But not over the top at all. It's not a dense whiskey. By the way, someone also just mentioned the Ardbeg committee. Really fantastic and fun. You know, every year is different pins. This is our classic, you know, our sigil for the house. But it's a great way to learn about all the new offerings that are coming out there, some of the fun facts. Really, really interesting.
Hey, Lauren, you mentioned using one of your products in a old fashioned. Mm-hmm. One of our Zoomers would like to know what you think about using it in a Manhattan.
I think using it in Manhattan is fine. You just, again, have to try to balance out the bitterness that you can have in there, which is why I think Ano would work better than the 10. And I would just step off just a little bit on the vermouth, or you could put Koki or something in there. Or if you really want to kind of change your Manhattan around a little bit, you can kind of go fun with some of the sherries and add just a bit more to it. So I'd say like an East India sherry can also kind of balance it out. It's not a classic Manhattan, but you know, you want to stay along that line that it doesn't go too sweet.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just speaking of Manhattans, just in case someone is looking for an interesting take on a Manhattan, certainly La Santa does a great job with that. I think that if you're careful with it, if you sort of dial back your portions, I think Ugadal does as well. But it's a cask strength whiskey, so you got to be a little bit careful in terms of your proportions to keep that cocktail on the balanced side of things. So that's name for the.
I would go more Corey Vrecken if we were going up.
Oh, nice!
Because there's so much acidity because you have that French Limoneux oak cask on there. You know, the Oogie, you've got that Oloroso sherry. So again, that's sort of like, you know, wonderful barbecue. You know, it's kind of a difference between a Memphis, and if anybody knows this, Memphis and Carolina barbecue. I lived in the South for a little bit. Somebody had to really educate me on this, and I got really sort of crazy about it. But it is that lovely vinegar texture to it that kind of cuts through that fat and adds that lovely, you know, clean, long line to the finish. So that's why I always feel like, you know, the Corey Vrecken is fun to put into a Manhattan.
Well, I was just keeping up on the comments. Mark, yeah, good point. Certainly Ardbeg 10 packs a bit of a wallop in terms of its peaty presence. But what we, and Lauren, I think you would attest to this too, when we're doing live tastings for people who are just getting into peated whiskey, more often than not, the response is, because the aromatics of Ardbeg 10 tell one story. But what happens on the palate is not an entirely different story, but it's a whole bunch of other chapters that you didn't necessarily read with your nose. So we tend to hear a lot at blind tastings or at festivals or whatever. I didn't expect to like that as much as I do. And to me, that's a testament to the complexity of a whiskey like Ardbeg. So well called out. That's Mark Hodgson in the comments there. So I need to.
And one of the ways that we also like to kind of trip people out on it is it was one of the cocktails that we were thinking of making for tonight. And Ardbeg 10 daiquiri, so fresh lime juice and maple syrup, is incredible because it's going to come in. If anybody's a fan of mezcal and you want to do something along the lines of margarita whiskey sour, Ardbeg 10 fits in there and it balances out so well that a lot of times I won't tell somebody that I put Scotch in there, because again, a lot of times people think that Scotch only comes from the smoky side, that lovely campfire cigar, and there's so many different levels and variations depending on what part of the country you're in. But put it into a daiquiri or a Bloody Mary, and it's kind of mind-blowing.
Oh yes, Bloody Mary, goodness. So good. I just had a reaction to that.
Each other. We're just like, all right, I'm going to order the Bloody Mary. You get the daiquiri.
Exactly. As for an aggressively peated whiskey, Ardbeg is a really malleable cocktail interface, which we'll explore here in a little bit. And not to steal your thunder about Wee Beastie, but that was certainly in the mindset as Wee Beastie was being conceptualized. So for right this minute, let's do as our next whiskey offering. Let's go for Glenmorangie Kintarubon. Now, the sharp-eyed observer of all things Glenmorangie may have noticed in the last year or so that this used to be a 12-year-old whiskey with a black label. It is now a 14-year-old whiskey with a green label. The one thing that hasn't changed about it is the price. It is the same price that it was before that, and my cat has decided that now is the time to protest everything that I've had to say so far. She agrees with none of it.
Whiskey, we all know it.
Well, it's my wife's favorite whiskey, and it's my wife's birthday today, so we're going to be enjoying some of these a little bit later, along with some rosé, some sparkling rosé. So because they're the same color, so we're just trying to stay in the same color family, basically. So if you're looking at what's happening with Kintarubon, I had mentioned at the outset that you can tell all your senses are involved in drinking a whiskey, including your hearing, because if you hear this, that means that things are about to get much better in your day. The rest of it comes down to you drink with your eyes, you eat with your eyes. So these colors that come out, particularly the secondary cast, those start to tell you a bit of a story about that whiskey. You start to get a sense of what is happening just even from looking at it. And once you dig into the aromatics of it, some of those things may be confirmed, some of those things may be refuted, but it starts to tell you that you're in a different neighborhood than you were with either Original or La Santa. There'd be family resemblance, of course. That's the idea behind the Glenmorangie range and the Ardbeg range. There is a family resemblance that ties them together, but the variances between the expressions is impressive. Hi, honey, I know. So what we're dealing with now, here's the line in the sand that things start to get very interesting from a whiskey geek point of view. There is nothing in the Ardbeg range that is bottled at under 46 ABV. There are a number of SKUs at Glenmorangie that are bottled at 43 ABV. This Glenmorangie Kintarubon is the first expression we'll have from the Glenmorangie range this evening that is bottled at 46 ABV. That may not seem like a big jump from 43, and it really isn't, but it does represent an important line in the sand for the whiskey consumer to keep in mind. What you got to keep in mind in terms of lipids, this is when we're talking about fatty acids, the building blocks of fats, which are naturally occurring in pretty much all whiskeys, whether they stay there or not, is up to the process of either chill filtering and not chill filtering your whiskey. So why bother? Lipids, fatty acids, are built of two parts. They've got a head part and a tail part. And the head part is fine in the presence of water. It's hydrophilic. It wants to go hang out with water. The tail part is hydrophobic. It does not want to go hang out in the presence of water. But if there's enough alcohol in the solution in which it's suspended, it doesn't care. Neither part really cares that much. It's a bit like inviting your and your significant other's work friends to the same holiday party. If there's enough booze, everybody hangs out together. But when the booze starts to run out, people tend to go hang out with who they're comfortable with. They tend to squeeze them out into their tribes. Fatty acids behave somewhat the same way. At 46 ABV in terms of an alcohol water solution and its potency, at 46 ABV, your lipid content, your fatty acid content, will stay suspended in solution because there's enough booze in at that party. Once you start to drop below 46 ABV, what you end up seeing is that the lipids become conflicted. They start looking around and the heads are like, no, let's go hang out with the water. And the tails are like, I'm going home. This party is no longer fun for me. So what you end up with is what the chemists would call a fatty acid micelle. a circling of the wagons, all the fatty acid heads facing out, the tails facing in, except in 3 dimensions. So it's a fatty acid ball. So you start to see them. You start to see them as haze in your whiskey. If I'm Bill Lumsden, I have to make determinations in terms of how everyone who drinks my whiskeys is going to drink them. If I'm selling them at cask strength, then you decide if you're going to dilute it or not. But anything that's not cask strength, Bill has decided I'm making that decision for the consumer. And I feel that it presents itself best at X ABV, whatever that is. If it's La Santa, he feels that it represents his initial vision for that product. It's best at 43 ABV. So now you got to deal with the lipids, because if you don't, and my cat Lulu, who is about to turn 20 years old, she agrees fully with this concept that if you are going to bottle something at 43 ABV, you're going to have to deal with the lipids, or your product is going to go onto the shelf hazy. That's where chill filtration comes in. So as a consumer, you're looking for that number, 46. If your single malt Scotch whiskey is bottled at under 46 ABV, it's been chill filtered almost exclusively. If you're drinking Anoch from the Knockdhu distillery, they bottle at 43 and they don't chill filter it. So, mad respect to those guys, but pretty much everybody else. If it's 43 or below 40, it wouldn't be below 40, but 40 to 45, essentially 45 and a half, you're looking at a chill filtered product. And is that the devil's hands at work? Certainly not. It's just one way of handling things, and it tends to manifest itself as a change in texture. After 46 and beyond, those are going to be almost invariably non-chill filtered whiskey, because it's an expense. It adds to your bottom line. And if you don't have to do it, why do it? So from the consumer's perspective, just keep 46 in mind. Secondarily, keep in mind that chill filtration is not the death knell for any whiskey. And the bulk of the whiskeys that you have access to coming out of Scotland have been chill filtered. Mm-hmm. So don't necessarily think of it as a reduction in flavor, because it's not. And studies have shown that it may shift your perceived texture a bit. So if you're looking for a thicker, creamier, more velvety mouthfeel when a slightly longer length of finish, non-chill filtered whiskeys, by and large, are more well-engineered to deliver that. Chill filtered whiskeys, however, tend to dance on the palate a little bit. They tend to rise up and show off a little more on the palate. And in those studies I'd mentioned, in blind tastings, the bulk of the people in those studies showed a preference for chill filtered whiskeys. So don't read too much into it. Just know from the consumer perspective what you're dealing with, and try to have that inform how you and your palate interact with that liquid, what your relationship is like. So with that, I'm going to drink this Kinta. So 46 ABV. It's a 14-year-old product now. I had mentioned that the La Santa was 10 years plus 2 years, so that math is simple. When Kinta was a 12-year-old product, that math was also simple. And I'm pretty crappy at math, so I like simple math equations. Today's Kinta is not that simple. It doesn't go like that anymore. It's not 10 plus 4. 4 years in first fill ruby port casks for Glenmorangie products is too long. It ends up getting too much extractors from the barrel, too much of that ruby port characteristic, and too much soluble pyrolyzed wood compounds as well, which are going to present more astringency on the palate, like leaving your tea bag in the hot water too long. The tea gets too astringent. That's essentially the same idea. So the bulk of what's in this bottle is going to be 12 years in ex-bourbon oak plus 2 years in ruby port cask, always first fill. But there's going to be some 13 and 1 and some 11 and 3. There just won't be any 10 plus 4. So you're looking on average 12 years plus 2 years. And if I dig into this, darker fruit characteristics, instead of dried fruits, instead of cake spices or pie spices and dried fruits, now I'm looking at dark fruits, strawberries to plums, maybe even a little cherry, some black currant, red currant, darker cocoa. All those things tend to jump out to me in Glenmorangie Kinta. The 46 ABV tends to give it a little strawberries and cream element for me on the palate. So as I suck this down like a very, very thirsty human being, we're going to move from Kinta. And again, before we jump too far off of that, water will do some stuff to it. It may make you happy. It may not. So it's worth experimenting with any of these whiskeys. It's worth experimenting with water. But just know that water is a catalyst for change. That change isn't always good. And it's like getting your hair cut. If you don't like it, you can't uncut your hair. So with that, I'm going to shut up again. And we're going to switch this over to Ardbeg Wee Beastie.
Before you switch off, though, there's a couple things I'd love to bring in this. First of all, I think this is one of the most incredible colors of whiskey that we have. It's if anybody's enjoying it right now, it's a beautiful kind of rose gold to it. It has that hint of port to it. Second thing,
it's a lovely
cocktails. If you talk to Brendan McCarran, this is his favorite to make an old fashioned from. Listen, we argue about everything every day, that swaps all the time, but he will tell you hands down, this is his favorite cocktail to make an old fashioned from. Talk to them, they will also say the Glenmorangie original is always their favorite. And one of my favorite things coming into this and talking about barrels, and something that's a little bit different from other distilleries, we do not break down our barrels. They actually come over whole, which is very unique. It's a little bit more costly, but because of it, it creates a much more pure whiskey. So it's a fun thing to kind of add into that. Sorry,
yeah, very good point.
That was no, these, in my head that I just, I was the
color
and getting excited over here.
the color is extraordinary. It's one of the now the Scotch Whisky Association is responsible for governing things about Scotch, and every Scotch whiskey to have the name Scotch on it has to maintain a certain amount of the historical color palette of Scotch whiskey. Yeah. This is about as far as you get to go before the SWA says you got to knock that off. Honestly, if you're a whiskey maker,
we're just going to try it a little bit more. And see
exactly, because he constantly pushes that envelope. But the SWA, if you went to them and said,
awarded distilleries out. Wow, excuse me on that. As far as Ardbeg, it's one of the most awarded distilleries, and he is one of the most awarded distillers for both Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. He kind of gets to play in the shadows a little bit when it comes to the whiskeys, and he also sits on a lot of these panels. He also kind of gets to push other folks and be like, but wouldn't it be cool if we tried this? So it kind of works out for our benefit. Okay, so Ardbeg. Sean,
we'll move on to Wee Beastie.
Are all Ardbegs peated? Yes, they are. That is a lot of the flavor that comes into it. We have done an unpeated whiskey before. It was very interesting because you can kind of taste what the core spirit is for Ardbeg and what those stills do. And again, what the terroir does. What the weather is actually adding into it. We had a lot of fun with it. We thought it was fun. We thought it was really cool. It did not go over as well as we would have liked for other people. People went, yeah, that's great. Please put the peat back into it. So we're always doing that hard roast over at Port Ellen, because again, that's coming down to the texture that you find over in our Ardbeg and our whiskeys itself. So Wee Beastie, this is new to the market. This came out, kind of fun, cheeky name, of course, that we deal with over at Ardbeg. So Wee being small, a Wee Beastie for us, because again, it's still kind of a monster in comparison to other whiskeys. So it is our 5-year-old. And again, it was one of those things where people were sort of surprised we were doing a younger style whiskey and what was going to happen. And I'm sure if you're looking at the progression of how we tasted it, we started with the 10-year-olds and then we went to and we ended with our 5-year-olds. It seems a little, kind of askew. It seems like that's not how it should be done. It should be starting with the 5-year-olds. But I will tell you, anybody has an opportunity to taste it right now, you're going to see that there's actually a little bit more of a creaminess to it. The alcohol did go up a little bit. We're more in the 47s over on this. And again, we're still using that ex-bourbon cask, but it does see a hint of Oloroso sherry to it. And that Oloroso sherry is kind of coming in because we've got that beautiful full strength, that fire to it, and sort of takes down some of the edges. It rounds it out and just, again, makes it really beautiful and balanced on your palate. I know I've said it every single time, but I'm just going to repeat it. It is non-chill filtered and it is no caramel coloring to it. By the way, caramel coloring is not necessarily a bad thing. We just kind of get to proudly say that this is what they look like and this is what our stills do, which is really fantastic. And the other reason we got incredibly excited about it, because, our small historic distillery and all of the struggles that it's kind of gone through, we added another age statement, which is wonderful, because when you look at the Uigeadail and the Corryvreckan, that is about the balance of the barrels itself. There is no age statement because at the end of the day, it's what's in the glass, not how old it is. It's all about the flavors and the components that go into it. And Uigeadail, if you don't know, that is actually the loch that we get our water from. So when we were talking about Glenmorangie, they have the Tarlugi Springs. That is a hard mineral water. We are soft, plentiful water with the Uigeadail because it's balancing out that peat complexity to it. It's pulling out some of the notes. And if we were to use a hard water, it would just be, again, a little too aggressive. And as far as the Corryvreckan, that is actually the whirlpool that is in front of Islay. It is the second largest whirlpool in the world, and it's a lot of fun for the folks over there. There's tremendous stories that go with it. Probably my favorite when it comes down to it is, depending on how fast the whirlpool is going or what it looks like, you're going to know what season you're going into. So if it's a little bit aggressive and going very fast, you're into a hard winter. If it's a little slower, it's going to be a beautiful summer. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but I like to listen to it. So on this wee beastie again, we are still on the same parts per million, about 55 to 60. So you have that lovely smoky component to it. And then again, 5 years old. This is the one where it's like somebody just added in like a little bit of like that salt water, like that kelpie into it. You get a little bit like more of that rich, sort of wonderful tar notes, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. And then again, you get that lovely liminess that's in there, but it's almost kind of like a grilled lime. Like it takes a little bit more of like that sweeter note to it, sort of that lovely campfire. It's been a lot of fun to have this. And yes, we brought in this to be enjoyed either neat or a drop of water, but this is one of the ones that we wanted to see, some of the people that love making cocktails to kind of take this to the furthest extension that you can, whether it's going into a penicillin, whether it's going into a daiquiri, something like that. We've even gone so far with some of ours. Cam, who is the other gentleman who normally is in this, seat, has put Ardbeg into a pina colada, and it was one of my favorites that I've ever had. So on this one, I'm actually going to add a drop of water into it. And that's not to take down some of the alcohol, or there's not that there's a burn in there. It's the fact that it being so young, it's a little bit tighter and I'm not getting some of the complexities that I know that are there. So that little bit of water is going to open up some of the esters and the essence that's in there. And again, it just kind of, see, now I'm getting a little bit more of that herbaceous notes that I wasn't getting before. There's almost like that sort of like mossy wet grass to it. That lovely earthy notes that you get when you're walking around Isla. It's incredible. And this is now part of our core statement. So you can find the Ardbeg 5-year-old, the Wee Beastie. And we also have I'm sorry, someone just say in addition to that, we call my Great Dane mix the Wee Beastie. Yes, thank you. Obviously, we're big dog lovers over at Ardbeg. He was one of our distillery managers, Shorty. So if you look at a lot of the boxes and the bottles, you'll see Shorty. That's kind of part of it. Really tremendous. So again, our core statement has actually changed a little bit. It's expanded. We will never make more whiskey just to make more whiskey. We are just surviving and flourishing, which is why we now have the 5-year-old Wee Beastie, the Anno, the 10, the Corey Brecken and Ugadale, and a very, very limited amount, if you can find it, is the Ardbeg 19, the Trevan. And that is the youngest in there, of course, is 19 years old. There's a little bit older, and those are barrels that we actually laid down when we took over the house itself. It does see a little bit of sherry as well. That can change. And if you look at it, you're going to see on the front, there's kind of a code of numbers on it. That is actually when the whiskey itself was distilled. And you also see some initials. Right now it has MH. It's not from Moet Hennessy. That's for Mickey Head, who is our distillery manager who just retired. He's also the person responsible for us having the committee membership that we have. And he will still be the president of the committee for a little bit. But recently we've had Colin come in, been really fantastic to kind of take over this very daunting, wonderful distillery. He's taken on the ropes and had to meet the approval of Mickey Head, and that's a hard task to go by. So we're incredibly excited to see where everything is going. Dan, are you making?
It appears to me
that
it appears to me that it may be cocktail time. We're coming up on the hour. Yeah, we're coming up on the hour, so I wanted to make sure that we've got the cocktail handled. Now, you had mentioned, and it got reflected in the comments, pina colada and whiskey. Heck yes, is my response to that. What you're looking for out of particularly American oak is extractives that taste like coconut. And so whiskey in coconut base. As a matter of fact, Ardbeg 10, 1-to-1 in a Collins glass and a bunch of ice with coconut water in the middle of the dead of summer is an extraordinarily refreshing drink that I recommend highly to anybody who's even a remote fan of smoky whiskey.
Since it's the winter, if you make an eggnog, one of my favorite things to do is actually to spritz Ardbeg on top of it.
Oh goodness, yes. Heck yeah.
So
So
the
I'm
drink
dragging
that
out
we're
my,
making is a penicillin, and it was created by Sam Ross, who did Milk and Honey. It's kind of taken off. It's a beautiful balance between an unpeated whiskey and a peated whiskey, which is why we chose to go with it. There was definitely some other discussions. Obviously, I kind of pushed for a daiquiri at one point because I don't know if I can go a day without having an Ardbeg daiquiri. But it's very easy to make. It's about an ounce of Glenmorangie Original. It's an ounce of Ardbeg 10. That's not how it was originally created. This is how we do ours. Just under an ounce of ginger honey syrup, and then also fresh lemon juice. Some people will prefer to kind of shake everything else and top it with Ardbeg. We like to shake everything in to kind of get that beautiful blend and complexity into the whiskey itself. If you didn't have time to make a ginger syrup, or if you don't, you can definitely find some pre-batched ones that you can add in, but it's very, very easy to do. Ooh, and somebody else is making the eggnog, so that makes me incredibly happy. So I'm going to go ahead and put mine together since Dan is cheating and doing his offline. So I think it's the fact that we talked about that we didn't want to do a shaking competition between the two of us. Original.
Yep. All right. So an ounce of original. Here we go. This is where the competition begins. This is a manual dexterity conversation that we're having at this point, but you will win, I guarantee. And then an ounce of Ardbeg 10.
Ardbeg 10, or you can do Wee Beastie.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to do Beastie. That sounds good.
Let's do Beastie. She says after she picks up the Ardbeg 10. I just need to be backed up in that.
I got it. I'm on you. This is good.
This is good? All right.
It's going to be fantastic. I guarantee it. Then we're going to go 3/4 ounce lemon juice. That's probably an easier way to do that. 3/4 ounce lemon juice. Let's see how that goes. Lulu may make her presence known here in just a second. We're going to cross our fingers and hope for the best.
And people have been asking to see the cat.
I know, I saw that. I think we can accommodate that.
I think the cat is very upset that he or she is not on camera.
So Lulu, we've got two. Yep. So fresh lemon juice and then a little bit of the ginger honey syrup.
This is the only time that I will say don't fake it on the lemon juice. Please use fresh, because a lot of the fake lemon juice, not fake, but the other lemon juice out there is processed to a certain way. It adds a little bit more sugar to it. So you're not going to have the acid that's going to cut through, sort of the honey and the orange and peach that you find in the Glenmorangie, and then that caramel smokiness that you find in the Ardbeg. You have to have that acidity to go through and break up the balance a little bit.
When you're ready, we will commence with this shake off. Yes.
Meg.
All right, ready?
No shake is perfect, by the way, in case anybody's wondering. So however you do it, go for it. And this is not to actually add any molecules into it. This is just supposed to be chilling it down.
Yep, just the standard sort of measurement in terms of trying to maintain temperature and dilution consistency, about a 10 count. A good 1/1000 to 10 will usually get you where you want to go in terms of the perceived temperature of that cocktail and the right amount of dilution.
I take it up to about 15, and I'm going to put mine over
nice.
the pink cube and strain it.
Are you doing a big cube? I'm doing sort of medium cubes.
Big cube. I feel big cube.
Nice.
Cube day.
Mine's got a bit of a lemon garnish. Did you do the candied ginger?
No, I did the lemon garnish.
So Pete would like to know where to get ginger honey syrup. And so Pete, I'm going to email you because I actually have a great recipe for it.
Oh, nice.
It's quite easy to make. You just have to let it steep for a while and then sit overnight. And if you happen to sort of peel or hard peel on the ginger itself, just use a cheesecloth or a coffee filter, or even, just your strainer itself to kind of, very easy to strainer to find on Amazon to kind of pull out some of the bits to it.
Oh, Sean would like the recipe too. So you know what, guys? I'm going to include a link to that recipe in an email to all of you tomorrow morning.
So this is Lulu, by the way. This is my wife Becky, whose birthday is today.
Happy birthday!
And this is my darling Lulu. She's not quite 20, but she's.
You know that somebody also put in the comments that Dan had a bottle of cake back there for your birthday.
Oh, for your birthday cake. Yeah, we're gonna do birthday cake. That's true.
Cheers.
So here, oh, she's bailing out. So this is a penicillin.
Yep.
Cheers. Here's to all of you. Caroline, did we get the? You're getting a lot of birthday messages, by the way. Did we get the questions answered that everybody was looking to get
answered? You guys were
answered?
so quick. We don't even have any more questions to go over now, but we do still have. I have to announce our code word for tonight, which let me do that quickly. So that is untamed. Tonight's code word is untamed.
Well, and that is the spirit of Ardbeg. Thank you so much.
So enter that into your Scavify app to earn 100 points for attending tonight's event. And now for the other giveaway, the giveaway that the brands are doing for us tonight, I'm going to turn things back over to Dan and Lauren for some trivia. I'm going to be monitoring the comments. And if you leave the correct answer, you're eligible to win. Now, unlike some other nights that you may have been on the line, we're not just doing one prize for the correct answer. The first 5 people to answer each of these questions are going to win a prize pack. We've got 15 prize packs. You can only win one though. So like if you type really fast and you get the right answer every time, I'm sorry, you're just getting one prize pack, but it's a great prize pack.
So maybe should we keep the hardest quite? None of them be all that hard, but should we have varying levels of difficulty, or should we just go for it?
Oh.
What is the name of Dan's cat? No, that's not a question.
It's already in the comments. My other cat, who I've not mentioned. If you can guess my other cat's name.
So sorry.
I think
so. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think we should just go for it.
Okay. Well, let's go with if you can, and spelling. If you can get the correct spelling, that would be ideal. But if you can't, our master distiller's name, if you remember that from the presentation, we would certainly take that as an answer. Lauren, is there anything that you specifically want to throw out there as a trivia question?
Yes. So the Pedius knows. What's his name? Not Lulu.
And it's not Lulu. That's true. And for our third question, let's see. Here's an interesting. It'd be a little bit geeky. Never mind. And we didn't cover off on that either. So. Ardbeg is on what Hebridean island?
You guys are so quick.
Got an easy one. The stills at Glenmorangie are tall as what?
Oh, that's another good one. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's a lot of giraffe coming at me.
For anybody who didn't have the answer, it is in fact.
Waiting for us to say that.
Oh, and here's just a random one. The finishing cask for Kintaruban. The more specific, the better.
Someone wrote cigar.
Nice, Sean. Well done.
All right, we did get a lot of right answers, but Dan, Lauren, could you tell everybody on the line what the correct answers were? Because I know some people on Facebook can't see all of these answers that we're getting on Zoom.
Yes, absolutely. So for Master Distiller, his full name is Dr. Bill Lumsden. So Lumsden is the correct answer there. Giraffe, of course, was the correct answer in terms of what animal is as tall as a Glenmorangie still. Isla, Islay, is the name of the Hebridean island that houses not only Ardbeg, but 8 other distilleries as well. It's colloquially referred to as Whiskey Island for that reason. About 3,500 residents and 9 distilleries. I like that ratio a lot. And then our last one specifically
is Shorty.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yes.
Shorty, that fella right over your head there on the wall. And the correct answer for the Finnish cask for Quinta Ruban is in fact Ruby Port.
Yes.
So well done to those of you who got both the port element and the ruby element. Mark, I'm just going to answer that one quick. Are all whiskeys on Isla peated? No, they are not. It really depends on where you're coming from in terms of the whiskeys you're drinking. The bulk of the output of Bruichladdich isn't. As a matter of fact, if it says Bruichladdich on the bottle, it isn't. It has to be a Port Charlotte expression or an Octomore expression in order to be the peated version of what they do. The bulk of Old Pulteney's output is actually, that's Bill's cat's name. Morangie is in fact Dr. Bill's cat's name. Old Pulteney is another one that produces unpeated whiskey. The bulk of its output is unpeated. That's Floyd, by the way, who's decided to start yelling at me. And Kalila, a good chunk of Kalila's output is also unpeated, but they do both, as does Old Pulteney and Bruichladdich. They do both, but with Pulteney and Bruichladdich, I mean not Pulteney, sorry, Bunnahabhain and Bruichladdich, the bulk of that output is unpeated.
Awesome. So I am just writing down all of our winners, 15 winners, guys. Congratulations. You are going to get your prize packs. Thank you so much for attending tonight. And again, for those of you playing along with our scavenger hunt kind of passport program that we have going, the code word tonight that will get you 100 points is untamed. So, 15 of you won an awesome prize pack. I will be emailing you all to get your addresses to mail out your prizes probably tomorrow morning. I will be emailing everybody a link to ginger honey syrup.
I started laughing because David goes, that was great. Glad that I blew off bagpipe practice. Sorry. That was good.
It was an unexpected comment. So thank you, David, for that.
So before we wrap things up, so Lauren, I know you mentioned that the Wee Beastie is kind of a newer offering for you. So I did want to ask Mark. So Mark, how long have we had that in our stores, and is that available at every store? There seems to be a lot of interest from our attendees in trying it.
Yeah, Lauren and Dan, great job tonight. You guys did very educational. I'm happy to say all the products that we sampled tonight are full distribution with the exception of the NO. The NO is in test market right now, so it's in 36 of our locations, but all the other ones are full distribution in our stores, and certainly not limited to those marks in our stores. We have a wide breadth both from Ardbeg and Glenmorangie in our stores. If you go into our single malt section, it's broken up by geographical location. So Highland, Lowland, Speyside, Isla, and other. We have some information there geographically and also about some of the taste profiles from those locations. So go in there, take a look, take some time to shop around those sections and really explore single malt Scotch. It's a great category for us. And these brands are certainly some big brand for us. And we appreciate our partnerships with Southern Glaciers, Doug Wiegand and his team over there. And again, Lauren and Dan, great job tonight. You can tell by all the comments, people are really involved. And I can tell you this is one of the biggest watched ones we've had so far to date. So kudos to you guys. Nice job.
It was absolutely our pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was, to Lauren's point, we're honored to be a part of this thing, and we hope to have you have us back again.
All right, so tomorrow night.
Done.
I can drink Ardbeg again tomorrow.
Exactly. I probably will.
I think I will too.
Well, thank you guys so much. We had such a blast tonight. We have so many people who are now excited about their prize packs. So you have really made a big impact on the people tuning in tonight. So we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you for everything. And we will see you again soon. We're all going to be drinking Ardbeg daiquiris now.
If If you have too
Excellent.
many, just have an Ardbeg Bloody Mary in the morning. By the way, that is not something that I should be saying, but I did anyway. So enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you,
Well
Lauren.
played.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to Joe. And thank you to everybody from Southern Glazers who was on to help support tonight's event. We will see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.